Hi, good morning. My name is Paul Supley, and I am the owner of Van Wyck's Chocolate House. It's a 18th century chocolate program that we do for historic sites and fundraisers for historic programs. We're here today at historic Fort Klock Restoration in Palatine, New York, and with me is my partner in crime, Nate Hoffmann, and we just want to welcome you to this. It's kind of an overview program of the history of chocolate, 18th century chocolate in particular, and dealing with the region here in the Palatine of the Mohawk Valley, Schoharie, and Albany, New York. So Dutch and German chocolate. We'll throw it. I want to give you a little background on chocolate and its history. Chocolate is an American product, the Americas. It actually comes from Central and portions of South America. It's a tropical plant. It grows on the stalk of the tree, not as period images show from people who have never seen one of the trees. It does not grow like a pear or an apple on the branches. It was used extensively by the Aztecs and the Incas, and probably even the Mayans to a certain degree, in religious ceremonial practices. It was heavily spiced with some more items that come from the Americas, cayenne pepper, and a variety of other spices and herbs, to make a concoction much different than what we know of chocolate today, overpowering to a certain degree. When the conquistadors colonized Mexico, they brought a lot of the food produce back to Spain, and obviously brought things from Spain to the New World. We call this the Columbian Exchange, or the American Exchange of items. And one of the big things that really set off that we're focusing on is the coca plant, chocolate. When the Spanish first brought chocolate over to Spain, they still heavily spiced it, much like they had seen and tasted from the indigenous populations where they colonized. And it was an expensive drink that was utilized for people who were fairly well off. As time gradually went by and we had other countries, France and England, colonizing the New World, more trade became possible in all these goods, and including chocolate. And by the beginning of the 17th or the 18th century, chocolate was pretty widespread amongst Western Europe. We had the Spanish occupying portions of what is today the Netherlands. So the influence was brought to Holland, from there to Germany, and eventually over to England and Ireland. Everybody had their own twist on chocolate, and what they utilized in chocolate to make it a more palatable drink for the average individual. So much so that by the last portion of the first quarter of the 18th century, chocolate houses, much like coffee houses, but chocolate houses sprang up all over, particularly in London and places that were very affluent. But to go back to speaking about the plant itself, the pods are a hard, elongated pod. And what happens is they harvest it off the tree trunk, and basically it's thrown into a pile on the ground and allowed to rot. Well, rotting the husk allows everybody to get to the nibs. It looks like a very fat kernel of corn. And the cob inside the pod itself does look like that, only they're milky white. This comes from roasting them just like you do a coffee bean. You would actually put it in a roaster over some heat, and it would cure and season the pod itself, the nib. At this point is where chocolate is shipped. When chocolate comes to a particular place to be processed, it is still done even through to the early 19th century on a granite mill known as a metate, the same exact stone mill that was being used by the Aztecs. And the metate was heated, There's a roller pin or a fine grounding pin, and Nate's going to show a little bit of how that's done. What happens is there's cocoa butter, and we've all heard of that, cocoa butter inside the seed itself. It takes heat and that friction from working it back and forth to actually crush the nib and extract the cocoa butter, get it into a paste-like form. From that point, and it's hard work, and if you can imagine, a place called Wendell's Chocolate Factory, which started at about 1740 in Albany, just in what's now Lincoln Park, up behind the Schuyler Mansion. There was a chocolate factory owned by Mr. Wendell and his two young sons. They employed anywhere from 15 to 20 men working these matatas day in and day out, producing cakes of chocolate. So you would scrape off all that chocolate you just produced, and you would put it into a form. It could be in a round form, it could be in a block form, and once it cools, it's wrapped, and that's how it's shipped. This is the chocolate that everybody from home to taverns, even to the Native Americans, would recognize any of these. These just happen to be examples of what you can still purchase today, products of Mexico. So they are still producing chocolate for this type of product. Now the chocolate that we're talking about is a lot like baker's chocolate. It's very bitter on its own. It's very thick, and it does need to be broken down either with water or milk and spices. And this is what we're going to talk about as we begin to put together a couple different recipes that would have been used within our region. As you can see, Nate's chopping the chocolate. It's good to have the chocolate cold when you're doing this. It works a lot better. As you can see, it doesn't stick to the knife as much. It is a chore. A lot of people today will use a food processor to do that. One thing I have on the brazier right now is some whole milk, and we're heating this up for this particular recipe that we're going to be doing. But the spices that we are using are very common to what we see in English, Dutch, and German recipes. So we have our cayenne pepper. Now that's what gives you a little bit of spice, a little bite to it on the back of the throat. You don't use a lot. Some people like more. But if you've ever had a spicy orange chocolate candy, you know how delicious that can be. But you can leave the cayenne pepper out if you don't like heat. You can substitute black pepper if you want. Now imagine that, putting black pepper in your chocolate. Just a little bit, quarter teaspoon for something that's going to make 4 cups is more than enough. It's fine. And you can play around with this at home a little bit. The other items that we would use would be the 4 main spice ingredients of any household, no matter what nationality you were. Cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, cloves. And yes, there's even an 18th century song about that. One of the other items you'll see that some recipes call for is star anise. And anise gives you that licorice taste to it. So if you like licorice without going through the licorice root, you can use star anise. The interesting thing is all of these things come from around the world. Whether it's China, India, Indonesia, they are spices and plants that are part of that universal trade that starts in really the 16th century on a massive scale. And by the time England is an empire, this stuff is readily available to everybody and very inexpensive. So while Nate was chopping up the chocolate and getting it chopped fine, I've been heating some whole milk. As we said, we're going to need some of that for the recipe. And we heated some water too. And it's approximately 2 cups per. This recipe is going to give you about 4 or 5 actual cups of chocolate to enjoy. One of the things that we want to talk about is you can do this at home. It's a very easy recipe. You don't have to buy the Mexican chocolate. You can actually go to your local grocery store. You can pick up any number of brands. This happens to be Lindt chocolate that we utilize with various cacao contents. You'll see that 90%, 75%. Cacao is that the ancient name for chocolate itself, but it also means it's got a certain percentage of the cocoa butter left in with recipes. The one we're doing today is actually from the Mid-Hudson Valley. It is a Dutch recipe. It came from down by the Terrytown area. It was in a receipt book or a recipe book from a particular lady. I don't remember her name right off the top of my head. I'm sorry. But it's not an overly spiced chocolate, so it's a very nice mild one. You have to remember that in the 18th century, chocolate was being used as a breakfast drink. It was part of your breakfast ritual. It could be used at other times as well. Coffee and tea, obviously, were used highly. And what people don't realize in the 18th century here in the colonies is that coffee and chocolate outdid tea consumption. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take the chocolate pot. You'll notice chocolate pots look a lot like a coffee pot. Usually has a side handle for tipping. And it's going to become evident why we have this piece of wood and a lid that has a hole on the top for stirring. But we won't talk about that for a few moments. I'm going to put this on the fire. If I could have the chocolate, please. We're going to take this. What we did was we broke the bar up into 4 squares. These chocolates are divided into squares. And there we go. And again, we're using a brazier. A brazier would have been filled with coal or wood pine knots, something to produce heat. It's a portable stove. Today we're using sterno in there. It's very safe for using here at a historic site. So I'm going to watch this very carefully as it starts to melt and put my ingredients in. This Dutch chocolate does call for half teaspoon, and we have 18th century spoons we're using, so we're using their measurements. So it's a half teaspoon of cinnamon. And the cinnamon, yep, you have to forgive us, the light is a little low in here. And this isn't our kitchen.
Feel good about that?
Thank you, sir. I feel very good about that. So we're going to add that to the chocolate. The next ingredient we're going to use is 1/8 of a tablespoon of cayenne pepper.
1/8 of a teaspoon.
1/8 of a teaspoon, excuse me.
Just
It's got a real bite to it. So you really want to be careful. You can always add more if you need it, but it just gives you that little bit of heat on the end. Thank you, sir. And next we want 1/4 teaspoon of ginger. Ginger is such a delicious item used in a lot of recipes. Ginger and nutmeg in particular. Perfect.
All right.
Ginger. Well, you can start smelling it come together already. When the chocolate starts to melt, we don't want, and it melts rapidly, we don't want it to burn. Okay.
3 to 4 teaspoons
of sugar. The sugar that we're using is brown sugar. Now, brown sugar is basically a sugar that's not fully refined. It has some of the molasses in it. We can use a white sugar cone. Both were available in the valley through all the different stores. It was very readily, again, it comes from the Sugar Islands, or what we call the Caribbean today, where most of our sugar still comes from, if it's not sugar beet. And sugar is used in everything. Everything. Again, the brown sugar is a little more healthier for you than white refined sugar. Ask your dentist, he'll tell you that. That's part of your energy to the drink as well. Okay. Got that melting pretty good. Yeah, I want the hot water first. So we're going to use about 2 cups. About 1.5 pints will do. Okay, we're gonna let that kind of bubble up a little bit. Yeah, let that start getting hot. We're going to do the same with the warm milk. We're going to add that. Just about right. Okay. I'm going to do this so I don't spill everything all over the place. 18th century kitchen, historic site. We don't want mice getting over everything. Excellent. So we'll call this a fairly watered down drink. It's much akin to the chocolate cocoa that you're used to using today, just with a few extra spices. So you could even take hot cocoa and add a little bit of cayenne, add a little bit of orange essence, orange peel to it, orange zest, a little pepper. You can experiment a little bit. This is what these folks did, and when they reached a recipe that they liked, they wrote it down and they kept it. So then that's all we're working off of. Beautiful. As this heats a little bit more, now this is going to come in play. We want to whisk this. We want to whisk this thoroughly.
If I may.
Yes, sir.
Need we add some vanilla first?
We could add some vanilla at this point. Yes, this does call for vanilla. We have a vanilla extract. We are not using vanilla bean ground. Sometimes it's just easier when you're doing large audiences to have this type of thing. And thank you, sir.
Absolutely, sir.
And this will just give it that nice, creamy, sickly sweet flavor that everybody craves. Oh, you can smell all these things coming together. It's wonderful. I do a holiday chocolate 18th century, which is basically orange peel or orange zest with sugar and a little bit of cayenne pepper. It's very popular for the holidays. Okay, we're going to take the spoon out, and now we are going to do the Malnello. That's what this is called. It's basically a wooden frother. You'll see it's corrugated. They come in a great variety. Some have holes in them, some are larger, some are smaller. Depends on what you're utilizing. But what you're going to do, and what the lady of the house would be doing if she was serving this to her friends in her boudoir, if she was a wealthy person, is you're going to, it's a mixer. You're going to froth. If you would, hold that top down if you would. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Now you could do this for half an hour because they didn't have blenders. They didn't have any type of power whisk to do this, so it's all done by hand. So you can see it's a little bit of fun process. And as you can see, Nate will show you some of the variety of the, you want to show them some of the variety of the different chocolate pots that we have here. This is a tin English chocolate pot, but Nate has a ceramic chocolate pot with its own particular Malnell. We have a original brass French chocolate pot. That's 200 plus years old with its original Malnell.
And that's spun?
And that's spun,
yeah.
Spun brass. Very common. You see that in a lot of 16th century, or excuse me, 17th century Dutch paintings. And the last one that we have to show is this little ceramic one. That is a copy of one from Monticello in Thomas Jefferson's kitchen. It makes maybe 1 or 2 small cups. And the cups we'll show you in a little bit when we go into the parlor. They tend to be more the size of a very small coffee cup or a large teacup. They can be used universally, but they are considered chocolate cups. Sometimes they would use even compote cups, which have a little lid on it. These stone houses can become very cold, and winters out here in the 18th century can be exceedingly cold. Warren Johnson, Sir William Johnson's brother, stayed out in the 1750s with Sir William, and he remarked that even the ink and the wine and the punch bowls next to the fire would freeze over in the winter. So that gives you an idea how cold it can get. So if you can keep the heat into an object, you know, a cover will do. I don't have any examples of those today, but if you ever go to Johnson Hall State Historic Park, the staff there can show you what those chocolate and compote cups look like. They have a nice collection. Awesome. I think we are all set, Nate. Yeah, let's take a look at what we've got there. You did a great job.
And it just rises right up.
Oh, yeah. That is frothed.
There we go.
And I don't know if you can see it in this light, but you'll see it as we pour it. That is really frothed. And like I said, you can do that for, you know, overheat, a mild heat like that, for up to half an hour and really froth it. and it's almost like a cappuccino type of frothing. Depends on how hard you want to work on it.
Well, you mentioned really using these things to keep themselves warm.
Yes.
Especially if it's something that's got that caffeine that you're looking to get that perk out of. It's a good reason we still drink a lot of our coffee hot.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
exactly it. Okay. We're going to venture forth and serve this in the other room. So you'll be able to see us pour it. You'll be able to see what it looks like. And some of the lucky people here will actually be able to get to taste this. Chocolate it is.
Thank you, Ed.
You're welcome, sir. And I think I'll join you. We're going to sit back and enjoy some coffee. Chocolate.
Sir?
Mmm.